Boo. All right. So everybody who had nothing better to do on a Saturday night than to join Kyle and myself, sincere appreciation. We're not going to call this a Halloween spookery, but it could be depending on how good or bad the show turns out. So thank you for everybody to show up and support Kyle and myself. And Kyle is a fellow reefer. He's got his own YouTube project going on. So if you like Kyle's message and what he's doing, I encourage you to hop over at his Reef channel. He's doing some pretty cool stuff over there. I think you'd enjoy that. Kyle is also active in the Discord groups and on Instagram. So without further ado, I welcome Kyle. Spooky Kyle. How you going, buddy? It's awesome. It's awesome. I know we've met on the Discord, and it's been a long time coming. Kyle's a person that I've learned quite a bit from. That's what I love about this hobby, is that you never know anything. And Kyle has actually executed some things that, yes, we can. He's executed some things that I'm working on still and are just a dream for me. We'll talk about those. And then we also have a love for calc washers. So we thought, hey, what the hell? Let's not only talk about Kyle in the format we typically do here, but we thought we'd do a little dive into calc washer, because we're kind of nuts about it, and we've got our own brand. So we'd like to throw a few ideas out there. And once again, I leave the guest on mute. Sorry, Kyle. I did this the last stream too, and I'll learn not to do that anymore.
You did.
Thanks, Jim.
You had me muted. Hold on, let me redo
that. Okay, right. Yeah, Kyle's so quiet.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
Yeah, I'm sure you can. I'm sure you can hear him now. Okay, I was like, anyhow, I'll learn not to do that one of these times. But hey, rookie streamers, man, what are you gonna do? Maybe one of these days I'll get.
I mean, I've never done this before, so I was just hoping it wasn't a problem on my end.
No, and Kyle and I have met once or twice to make sure we had all the things ironed out until I got behind the wheel here.
Our ducks in a row.
Yeah, exactly. So Kyle, so for everybody who doesn't know you out there, give us a little background about, what you do, because I think some of your skills in life definitely are contributing to some of the things you're applying in the hobby, specifically like e-power. And talk a little bit about the tank and how you got started.
All right, so a brief background about me. I am an electrical engineer. I went to a Merchant Marine Academy, and I work in a power plant right now. So kind of pipes, plumbing, and control systems are something that I just do a lot of, so it's something I'm familiar with. As far as the hobby, I've always kept fish, from the little, when you're a kid, you get a little 10-gallon with a hang on the back, Whisper filter from Tetra, to in 2018, I finally jumped into saltwater with a 32-gallon BioCube, which then turned into a very interesting 5-foot long 120, which then evolved into the 6-foot 180 you see behind me.
Yeah, and they're a lot of work getting up, and the growth in there is fantastic, because that's 6 feet of tank, so I can see the size of those colonies back there, and that's the magic of milk.
Yes. Calquas are really, not that I don't want to say I had problems before. Before the move, I was doing 2-part, and then that evolved into a calcium. Well, I planned for a calcium reactor with the new tank when I moved, because I was dosing so much 2-part and keeping track of, okay, the alkalinity is empty. Okay, the calcium's empty. Okay, magnesium, forgot about that one, occasionally. And that was a nightmare. So I was like, let me go to a calcium reactor. So we planned the 180 around a calcium reactor. And I quickly noticed how badly that'll depress my pH. I was lucky to break 8.0 when previously 8.2 was my normal daily high. Same rocks. I added more rock, but it was most of the same stuff, with the big change was the calcium reactor.
Yeah, and I'm sure most people are pretty familiar with how calcium reactors, but just a high level, if you don't, the effluent that's created in order to dissolve the carbonate skeletons is very acidic. So, as it drips into the tank, it increases the alkalinity, but then the pH typically tends to suffer a little bit. Although I think there's
I think it was Was it Rich or Ben Johnson refers to calcium reactors as carbonic acid generators, because
Yeah,
that's exactly what it's making.
exactly. And not to mention that there's quite a bit of additional equipment upfront costs with those things, not to mention CO2 cylinders and all the considerations. It seems like, a lot of the things that we add back into our tanks, or the methods that we kind of tend to do, you have to often make some kind of a concession with regards to, space available, budgets, safety, with CO2 cylinders and things like that. So we'll see.
And you'll see in some of the pictures, my calcium reactor is still installed, and it is running now, just very little to kind of supplement the calc, because I'm using saturated, but we'll get into that. You'll see it's eating up a good chunk under my stand for sure, especially, and I was limited in height as far as the CO2 cylinder. So, shortly after running, I was looking for alternatives. I almost went back to 2-part just to get away from the calcium reactor. And that's when I got into the Discord with Jim Graham, and I saw you guys all doing Kalkwasser. And then I took a trip to the Long Island Aquarium, and Joe was showing his daily 55-gallon Rubbermaid of Kalkwasser. And I was like, well, the aquarium's doing it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people I know are doing it. So maybe it's the right answer.
So was the aquarium, were they doing just normal saturated, or were they doing a slurry kind of thing? Or
I didn't know enough about Kalkwasser at the time when I saw it. I didn't see any mixing equipment, so I think it was 50 gallons of saturated.
Okay.
But he may very well just dump a fixed amount of Kalkwasser in, mix it all up, and dose it while it's still suspended.
And a 55-gallon drum.
Enough about it yet.
That probably couldn't have lasted that long in an actual aquarium.
I think that was daily.
Daily, good Lord, that's a lot. So yeah, that's one interesting thing that we'll talk about is, every method has a pro and a con, and we'll list some of those things through. That's pretty cool. I did watch that video that you did with Joe. That was impressive. So that's
that was a great time. Joe is a super friendly dude, and he's one of those guys you can tell he's a hobbyist at heart still. Even though he does that 20,000-gallon reef for a living, he was so passionate to talk about that reef. I condensed it down to, I think, a 30-minute video. I was there for at least 4 hours talking to him. He would go on as long as you'd let him.
Yeah, and he's one of the OGs in the hobby, so his experience and contributions are pretty impressive. So
for
Kyle
sure.
sent us a little looping video here and some content that we were going to go through based on his setup and whatnot. I believe this is one of the most impressive pieces that we were talking about this earlier in the week. This is purple stylo, right?
It's my favorite for sure.
And we were talking that the different variables in tanks, like if you guys saw my purple stylo, it looks kind of like a head of cauliflower, and it just gets taller and bigger, but it doesn't branch out at all like Kyle's does. And I wish it did, because I'd actually prefer to have the one that Kyle does. So there's got to be some variables there between the two tanks, and I'm guessing it's flow, but I don't know. And I thought maybe you guys
it could be flow. It's definitely one of those things where I think you and I were talking about earlier was, we think we're making educated decisions, and a lot of times we do not know as much as we think we know. Where, yeah, I've got some power heads in places, like there's one coming across kind of the base of that stylo, and there's another behind it, and you're getting all the flow from the return pump. But is that why it grew this way? I don't know.
So what kind of
we're kind of taking educated guesses.
What kind of power heads do you have in the tank?
So the bulk of my flow is a pair of the older Max Spec gyres that are those things are just going strong. I don't know about the newer ones. These are from the 120. They're from 2018, and I think I clean them once a year, and they're still going strong. There's a couple of those Jabo power heads scattered throughout. I think I've got 4 in there now. One aimed, you can see on the left-hand side, is going behind the rockwork. just to kind of keep detritus from settling back there. And then there's another one on the right-hand side, right behind that Montipora. I think in the video you've got, not my background, you can see it.
What model Jabos are those, the larger ones? I'm only familiar with the smaller ones like the SLW 10s and 20s. I have a couple of those in use.
So I think the one on the left is a 20, and then the one on the right is like the biggest one they offer. It looks totally different than the rest, but it functions just the same. I just threw it back there to get some flow behind all of the growth, and it's been a non-issue.
And how old is the colonies in there? The stylos and especially the Montipora, that's impressive as well. And I know that's got to suck up some alkalinity.
So most of the coral did come out of the 120 that went up in late 2018. How much of it was already there, though, I don't remember. I know the purple stylo, I want to say I added to the 120 in maybe early 2020. I don't think it's like an OG. I did lose a lot of stuff way back. When I first got started, you throw an SPS in there, you think you know what you're doing, and you don't.
Killing shit was my hobby for the first year, yeah.
Making calcium reactor media.
Yes.
So
sure.
I definitely bought a lot more coral in 2020, not knowing we were going to be moving, but I was just I was getting it together. I was starting to get good at this. So I started buying a lot of SPS. So a lot of this is all from 2020, the like that Hollywood Stunner.
Okay.
That's what's curling and cupping on the right-hand side.
That green one.
In the big tank. Oh, you've got the Nano up. Sorry, that's a Sinulera. I totally forgot. I gave you pictures of the other tank.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was a close-up or not. Or that's probably a little better of a side shot of your large tank, and then your other side as well.
Yeah, so that cupping on the right-hand side is a Hollywood Stunner that needs to be cleaned up a little bit. I've got so much overgrowth, and I've kind of been taking the, let nature do its thing to an extent, see what corals do what to each other and kind of how they settle in naturally. But I think we're at the point where I got to start intervening.
Yeah, I'm always so torn about that. You spend, all that blood, sweat, and tears, and maybe a little bit money, depending on how, what you bought. Yeah. And you kind of want to see what progresses and what unfolds naturally. But at the same time, you're like, oh my God, I've done everything I could. It's been 2 years. This thing is beautiful. And now, I got to hack it apart, or I got to move it, or something's going to kill it. And it's interesting, the thought processes that you go through your head.
And I'm also afraid of killing it while trimming it.
yeah, or exactly. Yeah. Make an adjustment, you move it, and then all of a sudden it gets mad and then it dies, right? So, I mean, it's just one of the worst things.
That purple style has been my pride and joy in it, and it's breaking the surface of the water now, so it does need to be trimmed. And I've been putting that off because I'm afraid of clipping a branch and suddenly getting STN or RTN and wiping out that whole colony. I mean, that thing's 2 foot across.
So maybe we really aren't reefers. Maybe we're just anxiety junkies, because even when we're successful, we're still shitting our pants because I'm just waiting for something bad to happen.
And I'm sure my wife's sitting there going, I tell you all the time not to mess with it. You make things worse. You always hate messing with it. And I create most of my own problems in the tank.
Exactly. I love fucking my shit up. Run us across your light scheme. What do you got going on there?
So I'm still running a T5 hybrid. I'm putting off replacing the T5 bulbs because I do want to do an LED in place of the T5s. They are a little pricey to run. Obviously, T5s are going to start getting harder to get. I know parts of Europe stopped manufacturing them, which is where we're getting them from. So I've been looking at probably replacing the front pair and back pair with a single Quanta bar on each side. I just haven't bit the bullet yet because I haven't come up with a plan for mounting it, since this is a aquatic life fixture where the T5s have an integrated LED mount. It's all like one easy to install thing. So I have to come up with a way to remount everything. The main LEDs inside them are some older AI Hydra 52 HDs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
And they're not
fancy.
melting.
Nope.
I'm looking for icicles, and I don't see any icicles.
A new problem.
Yeah.
It seems like something changed when they went to the next series, which was the 64, I think is the next number. Okay. Those ones have a lens melting problem, and I don't know if they changed the chemistry of the lens or the spectrum of the diodes, but you're going to see that everywhere. As everybody's melting new lenses.
Or the heat sinks, things like that.
Yeah. These old lights seem to be rock solid. I bought them used off a guy, so I don't even know how old they are.
I mean, that even though I've had lens melting issues personally with my AIs, I like the lights. They grow coral. They just have some technical issues,
and they're solid.
Yeah, they're not bad lights for growing coral. I think the spectrum is there and whatnot. I came from an AI or an ATI fixture as well, and I ended up having to go through a whole rigmarole to figure out how I was going to hang new lights, because it changes everything. Because half your lights are literally hanging from your T5s, and you're like, well, now what, right?
Yeah, if I eliminate the T5s, I need to find a way. But I'm using the cantilever mount, so it's got a pair of crossbars hanging out over the tank. And so I think I can use that to hang the Quantas and just come up with a way to then hang the LEDs between the Quantas in a similar fashion.
Yeah, there's a million ways you can do that.
I just need a good plan before I start taking things apart.
So what kind of power are you getting at the sand bed and maybe towards the middle top?
Oh, so last time I measured, and I'm sure the T5s have degraded since then, near the top, I'm looking at like 400. I think that the top of that stylo is probably getting roasted right now by the sunbeam at the surface. But I do get a good spread of, depending on where, based on some shadowing, anywhere from 50 to like 90 near the sand bed.
Oh, that's
so it's got good light penetration. You can see that there's a green stylo, not a green stylo, a green Montipora growing out onto the sand bed. I don't know if we can see it. There's in the middle. I might have left a frag rack totally in the way. There's a model of the Titanic that's got Cyphostraea growing on it.
Oh yeah, I've always thought about doing that too. Is doing some interesting shape. Okay.
Yeah, I gotta clean up. I've got chunks of Monty that fall off and they hit the bottom and they just continue to plate out. So that's I'm like, I really do have to do a cleanup, which not to complain about good growth, but like I've got some cleaning to do.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm in the same boat, but that's okay. So for sump, what do we got going on? Looks like
so this is a custom sump from Me Loves Reef. That's Mark Levinson. Mm-hmm. It's got the refugium on the right-hand side, and the left-hand side is my mechanical filtration. I've got the skimmer's got Swabby in it. That's what that cord is coming off the top to clean the neck, just to reduce maintenance. You know, I'm an electrical engineer, which means I like gear. I like automation. The less I have to do, the more likely the things are going to get done.
Who makes that skimmer?
That is an eShops, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yep, it's an older, that came off the 120 as well. I reused as much equipment as I could because most of it was a little oversized for the 120. It was like 120 to 200 gallons. And I don't run a particularly heavily stocked tank, so I haven't had any issues with the size of the skimmer. What's
been your experience? Because I always found it interesting, skimmer sizes and the discussions about, well, if you use too large of a skimmer, you're not going to get any skim mate, but then if you use too small of a skimmer, you also don't see any pH boost from it, because you really need to move a heck of a lot of air, in my experience, to get any noticeable kind of pH bump. I know I've only have experience with Red Sea, but they skim no matter what. And I just keep putting bigger skimmers on my tank and they keep skimming. And I don't know.
So this thing just works. Maybe, I don't know what they call a medium bioload is completely subjective. What's your idea of medium?
Yeah.
But it does definitely move enough air where, like, if my skimmer, the skimmate locker gets full and the skimmer shuts off, I can see the pH change. Absolutely. So it's definitely at least moving enough air in order to keep the help with the pH boost. So you can see it in my graphs.
Yeah, I mean, assuming you're not
If
just
it goes
pumping
off.
more CO2 laden air in there, right? But yeah, you can.
No, so that has a line that goes with all my other lines that slip into the basement. It goes through a CO2 scrubber and then outside.
Okay. Yeah,
So I do
that's
have fresh
and
air coming into it.
yeah. If I was sucking inside air most days, all I would do is dry my pH down. So I've got like say a strong line out, and I'm also scrubbing because just my house is pretty buttoned up. Okay, and then here's the right
leaving
side.
the scrubber is not a big deal. It's another canister filter. It's in my basement. I kind of fill it when I remember to look at it. I don't know if CO2 scrubbing the outside air makes a huge difference, but at this point, it's one of those. And when I think about it, things.
Yeah, I look at it as what's your total net additive as far as CO2 content from the air and how it equilibrates into the tank. It's just a summation, right? So if your inside air is pretty high or at a medium point, and you're drawing in additional air from the outside, but you're sucking all you can out of that, whatever your total input is what it is. And it's one thing I've kind of
you're never going to eliminate it unless you have a lower source, because a lot of people talk about surface agitation as well. And if the air in your house is full of CO2 and your skimmer is taking that same air in, you're just going to find an equilibrium point.
Right. And ironically, as we're going to talk about it, we need CO2 when we're talking kalkwasser, right? Because every hydroxide makes alkalinity because of CO2 being in your water. So it's kind of an interesting point where I think I've talked to a hobbyist or two that may have experienced too low of a CO2 and limited out their alkalinity addition because of it.
I think people are seeing that with recirculating skimmers, where you're taking your skimmer cup's air and bringing it back into your intake. And at that point, you're scrubbing the CO2 out of the already scrubbed air that's picking up a little CO2 out of the water. And in that case, you are going to end up net negative CO2, essentially. You're going to start bringing that number down and down and down, as opposed to, bringing it down, but not too far.
Right. And Jim mentioned, know your CO2 meters are cheap. And I agree. So, he recommended some CO2 meters early on that I tried out, and they were good. They were cheap. And then eventually I wanted to see relationship. And then, you can take it as far as you want. You can jack it into your controller. It doesn't matter which kind of controller you have. Or you can but get to know the relationship and where you start to see things cross out.
Yeah, in my case, that was actually something I totally forgot about ahead of time. Using Home Assistant, I have a CO2 meter, and I can see, I don't know how well this will work, but nope, that's not going to work well. But you can see I've got a graph of my CO2 in the living room where the tank is, independent of the apex. And, you could integrate that into your aquarium controller, like you said, but that doesn't seem worth the cost.
Yeah,
you need that advanced sensors module and a specific type of meter.
I think it cost me about $300 total between the sense module and just all the ancillary stuff along with the CO2 meter itself. So not a cheap solution by any means, but it was a good learning experience. And like I say, I have an alert set on my Apex.
To mess around.
And if my CO2 is over 700, it pops me a message and I go open a window, because if it stays at 700 and above for too long, I see my pH drop. So that's, like I said, anything works. Just a casual thing like you have is just as effective, for sure.
Yeah, you've got options. It's just information. You're not going to really be able to. Some people I've seen try to use it to control skimmers, but
yes, yeah.
I don't know if you end up overcomplicating things.
Yeah, you certainly can. It's, again, more of a value added, right? So like for me, I kind of tend to say I like distributed control, but then when I look at what am I actually controlling with my Apex? Temperature. That's it. Otherwise, it's all monitoring, so I can make decisions.
Yeah, for the most part, it's watching, which is good. You need to have your watch guard. Like everything you'll see on my tank, most of it is being watched in some way, shape, or form by the Apex. Like the CO2 bottle in the back. I did plumb a a pressure switch onto it. So if the bottle starts to drop, I mean, with CO2, kind of when it triggers the pressure switch, it's probably too late, but it will tell me. So I don't even have to look at it. It's just one of those like, hey, here's a red flag.
Do something. Yeah, I like that.
Yep.
So what are you dosing besides, we know Kalkwasser, we'll get into how we're doing that, but
you pulled out the moonshiners. I have been incredibly inconsistent with it lately, but at least it's forgiving. For trace elements, because I'm trying to avoid doing as many water changes as humanly possible. And with Kalkwasser, I haven't needed it for nutrient control anyway. So I do dose trace. I am using the moonshiners method. I am not the most strict about remembering every day to do the dailies. And I'm probably approaching overdue to do an ICP test. But things are just working. So I've kind of been like, everything looks good. I'm not worried about it. You know, that's a kind of a judgment thing you got to make. But I do need to get a little more on top of it. I'll probably do an ICP next week and make sure I'm not missing anything critical or accumulating anything critical before I, learn the hard way.
So how many different, with the moonshiners, I think you're the second person I've talked to that's been playing with moonshiners. How many different individual elements or things do you have to dose typically? Or does it vary depending on ICP feedback?
It depends on your needs. In my case, so the dailies, there are 6, or there's 5, but I'm beta testing a 6th. There's a cobalt, chromium, molybdenum, I think is that bottle on the left, right? Then iron, selenium is the one I'm testing. And then there's vanadium and iodine. And this is based on just things that don't remain bioavailable. Like iodine breaks down incredibly rapidly, especially with exposure to UV light. So that's one that you add it. And if you were to test it the next day, it's already back down. So that's the point of the dailies. Otherwise, everything else is just larger. I don't want to call them not macro elements, I guess, but things that can stay there. You can accumulate more of, let them deplete a little bit. You got more wiggle room with.
Yeah, right.
Kind of like how magnesium is, where nobody has some people do put magnesium in calcium reactors, but magnesium is not something you're dosing daily.
No, it's something, shoot, if I remember to measure my magnesium every 3 or 4 months, I'm lucky. Just seems to be, I know every tank is different, but my tank doesn't seem to suck up a lot of magnesium. I don't get too worried about it.
Oh, for sure. So now you've got my calc stirrer up. So this is where I get myself into a little trouble with Chris Meckley, because I am following his method for dosing, but he does not like stirrers. He would prefer the reservoir. And I've already got a 50-gallon drum of RODI, a 50-gallon drum of salt water. I don't need another one. And the stirrer is just easy maintenance. It sits there. My pump just pushes RODI into it, so the pump's not getting exposed to the caustic solution, and it drips into the tank, and it has been working just fine. It definitely can achieve the goal, at least based on my experience and in my water volume. I don't know if you scale this up much bigger and then it doesn't become practical due to the flow rates, but I have not exceeded that point yet.
And when you said Meckley's method, explain that. Maybe not everybody's familiar with what that is.
Yes. Master Meckley, he's Kalkwasser dosing method involves measuring your pH and adjusting your Kalkwasser based on pH as opposed to alkalinity. Like most people are dosing their tank based on alkalinity and calcium values. In this case, I'm dosing just to boost my pH and kind of letting my alkalinity do what it does. And initially, that is a little scary when you first get started and you see that alkalinity rise, especially if you're one of those people that keep alkalinity a little closer to normal seawater, like around 7, 7.5, 8. I always because when I got started, I was using Instant Ocean Reef crystals, which is like super high alkalinity to begin with. So I wasn't exactly afraid of seeing 10 or 11. And so initially, I did get that spike up to 10, 11. I might have hit 12. And then as it all settled out, you get your dosing volumes right, it kind of balances. So now my alkalinity stays between 8 and 9 for the most part, depending on, it's affected a little bit by evaporation and weather in the house and obviously some coral mass, as things die or get trimmed, I cause a spike. But it's been fine. You know, I've been doing this probably close to 18 months now.
It's crazy. I think the variability and the different ways we can get to a solution, and how many times I probably reversed my thinking in many things in reefing, especially where chemistry is concerned, is, you know, when I first got back into reefing, it had been a while, and it was the beat down of don't let any parameters, you know, deviate from anything. Keep it as rock solid, stable as possible. And there are many successful reefers out there that are doing that still, right? And you can look, and undeniably it works. And then you've got your approach with Kalkwasser where you're like, hey, I'm going to take this one parameter and I'm going to throw it under the bus and just run it over daily, right? Because that's what you're doing with alkalinity. And your tank is thriving and healthy, and it works great.
I have a Trident, so I know what my alkalinity is. And I honestly, the Trident was one of those things, it was really cool when I got it, and I was really on top of it. And now I barely look at it.
See,
it's like, yep, everything's within normal range.
And that's what Kyle and I are going to talk about here for a bit, is Kalkwasser and the different approaches. And I have a completely different approach than Kyle. And not just because my method of dosing is different, it's just my method of control is different. But it's kind of funny. I would probably take my Alcatronic and throw it in the garbage if I was doing your method, because it would drive me nuts. I'm like, what?
And that was one of the reasons I also made the switch on the Trident to the ABC reagents, was why, you know, not that I regret buying it. I like the tech. It's really cool and it does work. But the, you know, ongoing costs of the reagents, even if we were to say that the off brand is lesser quality, which I don't agree with, even if we were to say that, I don't care. I'm barely paying attention to it as it is, as long as it keeps chugging away and is roughly in the ballpark. So if something goes really askew, like my pump gets stuck on, I'll see an alk spike and a pH spike. Okay, I know where to start looking for a problem, but I'm not using it to go, oh no, my alkalinity drifted above 9. What am I doing? You know, right now it's 9.4. What's it been? Let's look at a graph. It was 8.6 on Monday. It is trending a little upward. Let's look at, oh, it only shows me a week at a time. Yeah, it's been between 8.3 and 9.5, 8.4 and 9.5 for the last week.
That's not too bad. And there are a pile of parameters I've found beyond alkalinity that, at least the corals in my tank, for what I'm doing, they don't care. You know, if they're up or down or not exact. And the only time that I get scared is when my alkalinity dives. Like, I can shoot it up. Now, if it's gotten too low, I've had some bleaching events and some die off and things like that happen where if I screwed something up, I don't think I really had any catastrophic equipment failures per se. But I've seen it where if my alk drops below, let's say 7, I've got some corals that are, you know, very distressed. But like you said,
I've definitely noticed that you definitely get a lot more. It's kind of contrary to normal convention. Is it seems like you get a little more forgiveness on the high end than on the low end. Like,
yeah,
you know, when I first started this, I spiked 13, which if we're talking about 7 or 8 being normal, that's a huge high. But also, if you let it get below 7 down to 6, which isn't a huge low, you'll start to see real problems. I don't know if it's because it affects its bioabilities. Sorry.
Is that something to do with can light impact that? I don't know. Maybe if anybody else in the audience is getting experience. I've heard some discussions where if you've got really high par, you know, you I don't know if there's a correlation there or whatever. But you know, I've had a few events where my dosing was interrupted for whatever reasons, and all of a sudden I had problems. And it's usually always, you know, oh shit, I'm on vacation, or it's even happened when I'm home and I haven't been paying attention to things. But still, you know, all those alerts that you set up on your controller.
There's something about that that involves phosphate too. I remember seeing something about phosphate where your higher phosphates will allow for higher alkalinity, and something to do with the relationship and how it protects the coral from it. That could have been purely anecdotal as well. I don't know if there's any real science to back up any of this. I'm sure a lot of the science in this hobby is just guesses to correlate things that we've witnessed.
Yeah,
correlate. Mostly anecdotal.
Right. Every correlation that we draw is causation, right?
Yeah.
Well, it happened this
But
way,
like I
and
said,
that's.
we don't know as much as we think we know about this.
I agree. So then, let's see what we got going on here. We'll dive back into that, but I just wanted to. This is your mixing station, and you just pump that up and down from
so
the
you've
basement.
got the two white lines in the back go up to this 180. The larger diameter line is the is the ATO if it's even needed. I ended up having to go to that's 3/8 instead of 1/4 inch tubing in order to reduce the head losses, or well, it was really the friction loss due to so much head on the PMUP being in that basement, because this is in my basement. And then the 1/4 inch line is the calc stir. So both are drawing from the same RODI reservoir.
Okay.
I have the RODI automated as well into the apex. There is a optical sensor in the RODI. When it gets down to the bottom third, it'll kick the RODI on and run it for 4 hours, which based on watching it run, will get it almost full again.
Do you do like an auto backflush first to clear the membrane before you run it in there? Or
Yes.
Just curious.
I'm running the Aquatic Life pump still on this, their RO Buddy pump, which when it gets powered on, it goes through a flush first. It's like this whole integral housing with a pump, pressure switch, flush valve. So when it powers up, it does a 30-second flush and then starts producing.
I might, after the show, I might ask you a little bit more details on that for sure, because I've been thinking about that for my system too, where instead of me manually going down, flushing, getting distracted, go back down 3 hours later, it's still flushing. And then I flip the switch, and then yeah, all I've been doing is just dumping water down the drain. And I'm like, and I do this like all the time. So it's like, I gotta change that. So for sure.
Yeah. The RO Buddy pump was definitely one of the smarter investments I made to, just it eliminates one more human error.
Yeah, I like that. Like I say, I don't like to do much control, but simple tasks like that, I'm definitely a huge fan of. They don't add value.
Especially things that are low risk. Like, what is the risk of automating that? One day it doesn't flush. Oops.
Yeah,
or it gets
that's a good.
Flushing. Oops.
Yeah, risk tolerance and mitigation. Everybody's got a different level. Like I have some very low tolerance, and that's why I do the calc method that I do, where I get a little gun shy with control failure, right? So, like, like I completely agree with Kyle on dosing to a steady pH and throwing your alkaline into bus is fine for corals in most tanks. And maybe you have a tank that you have some corals that won't take that, and you'd find out rather quickly. But I think that's a valid, viable method, and that doesn't bother me. But what freaks me out is, holy cow, what if my pH meter or probe goes wonk, right? And then it starts making bad decisions because of bad readings. And that's where I get gun shy at a personal level, right? Not saying you're crazy for doing it, just saying, especially when I step away for like 2 weeks.
I put a lot of faith in this Apex. I put a lot of faith in it, and I put a lot of faith in these probes. Absolutely. But if one safety factor I do have is on the Vectra dosing pump. It does have a max daily limit you can set.
Okay.
So I do have that set higher than what I've calculated it should be able to dose based on evaporation. I gave it a little headspace above that, but it has a limit where the pump, even if the Apex is telling it to be on, the pump will say, nope, I've dosed too much.
Oh, I forgot about that. I use a Vectra for dosing my Kalkwasser as well. I guess I forgot about the max daily limit.
In Mobius, you can set a maximum daily limit.
Yeah, because and you think kind of like I do. I like redundancy in systems and saying, hey, if I have to, how many different ways can I shut this off, right?
Yep.
So Kyle is dosing to a consistent pH, and I'm still like get off my lawn, old school, just keeping my alkalinity as steady as possible. So he's a little bit more forward thinking in that respects than I am. I'm dosing slurry, however, so that's where I'm a little crazy, and I'm like, oh yeah, no big deal. This is easy, And well, there's people out there that think I'm crazy for that, but this is where the input here on the left side at the 90-degree elbow is a 1/2 inch, and then the output is 3/4 inch. And then you could see that that line coming down from the top with the blue RO line. That's coming from the Vectra. So, and then I'm just drawing.
So how do you keep that in solution, Rob? Because that's always been one of the things where, like, when I started to hit the limit and I put my calcium reactor back online, was maybe I do go to slurry in order to get that higher concentration, but then I can't really use my stir.
Right, and I had that same Avast. I started out with that same stir that you had. I like that stir. It's nice.
Oh, it's great.
It's like you said, it's a space saver. If you had the space, or and you didn't want to look at it, you had a place to put it. A 55-gallon drum or whatever, a 5-gallon bucket, perfect, right? But your case, when you got to put it under there, that's great. I liked it. It was a great thing to do. But slurry is for when you hit your evaporation limits, right? And then you don't want to put in a calcium reactor. So you've got your end covered from a calcium reactor. Or let's say you hit your evap limits and you could use some extra 2-part. Some people do that. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. This here, I'm using what we call 2%, which is 2% by weight volume of Kalkwasser. And I'm using a Jabo SLW10 to keep it in suspension. This configuration has been in use for 22 months now. I think I'm 2 months shy of 2 years on this. So
you've been rocking it a long time.
Yeah, it's been a long time. And the pump that's been in there is actually been running longer than that. So that's been running almost 2.5 years. Because remember, I think it was Mahina Corals and Telegram were on a stream. I think it was with Reef dudes, and this is just when I got back into the hobby, and they were talking about Kalkwasser slurry, and I'm like, oh, I remember playing a little bit with this way back in early 2000s. It wasn't exactly slurry, but I was starting to play with dosing the scum on the bottom, right? Because I had so much growth, and I was, wasn't getting my alkalinity up.
Trying to get some extra oomph.
Yeah, it wasn't full on slurry, but I was starting to, push the boundaries on that, and all of a sudden we're like, oh yeah. So I ran out and bought like SLW10. Like a couple weeks later, and I just threw it in a bucket of slurry and just started the clock on it, right? And saying, oh, well, let's see how long this lasts, because the debate was, oh, these pumps will never last, or how can I keep it in suspension because it'll destroy itself? And I'm like, I'm interested. It was like $80, $70 for the pump. And I'm like, screw it. So it sat there in a solution of calc slurry in a bucket for 6 months before I ever started dosing it. I'm using that same pump. 2.5 years later.
That's got to be a good pump, because the calcium hydroxide solution is like, what's it, a pH of 12.7 or 12.8? I the only thing I can think of worse than that would be sodium hydroxide, because both of these things can give you nasty chemical burn.
You're gonna kill me, because watch later in this here. I'm gonna advance this video, and you're gonna see me do something. You'll be like, "You're nuts," and I am. But,
oh no!
So when I first made this basically, it's a Venturi mixer. Just makes a turbulence in there. What I found is I'm still working on. I have to periodically, like anything else, it gums up after a little while. So you'll see I just put some quick disconnects, throw it in a little citric acid, and swap them out. I do that every 2 to 3 months as a regular maintenance piece until I can at least figure out.
Set that up.
Yeah, I just turn them off, pop it off, throw it on the next one, and I don't even shut the pump off. But so yeah, it's just because it only takes 30 seconds to swap it out. And then, because this is a temporary setup, you'll laugh, I'm just using some painter's tape wrapped around a bottle of stuff I'll never throw in my tank anyways.
How long has it been a temporary setup, Rob?
This one here, 3 months, 2 or 3 months. Well, I was.
That's not too bad for temporary.
No, I've been working with Kyle from Adaptive Reef. He's building me a custom board and stuff like that, and it's just been a while. So I actually took receipt of that. It got delivered last week. So the temporary setup is over.
Oh, cool.
Because when I get this all moved around, I've got to shift this wall, and then I'll put my power system, and we'll talk about that. But so this is essentially
Kyle does make some nice stuff.
Yeah, and Yeah, I was liking their stuff before they got bought by the Great Evil. And then you can see the SLW10 controller in the background there. And then, like I said, just I do like the Vectra. It's mechanically, it's not as sound as some other pumps, but the controllability on it, hands down, beats most other things out there that I've seen. Maybe GHL program's pretty good too. I'd say that would probably be the next best one. But
yeah, my only gripe with it was we didn't get control over it with the MXM. That is the only negative I have.
So then this is the original
Oh,
SLW10. That's almost 2.5 years old now. And then, so one thing, there we go. So that's me. So what I'm doing here is I'm fishing around. So we talked about different grades or different brands of kalkwasser or sodium hydroxide. Like, what should I buy, right? And I've recently moved to Mississippi lime, right? And I previously had been using bulk reef supplies, pharmaceutical grade or whatever. And what I found is even with the SLW10 is that every other refill, I would have to just dump that thing clear out because it would settle, not horribly, but I would say it would accumulate too much on the bottom over time where it would throw off my percentage. And then I'd see I'd see things drift. That Mississippi lime, you can throw a handful of it into the air in a room and come back a day later and still see it hanging around in the air. It's so light and fluffy. It's not piling up down there anymore like it is anymore. So I've since stopped re-emptying my bucket. I just throw it in there. It never accumulates on the bottom to any extent at all, like just a tiny amount. And it was just me doing hey, am I building up piles on the bottom? Nope, not with that Mississippi. That stuff is amazing.
Yeah, I made the same choice and switched to the Mississippi. I started getting it from Avast because he started selling the smaller packages of it, because that was the biggest hesitation. Was I was using the BRS Pharma grade, and then I switched to the Kohler Labs from saltwateraquarium.com. And I don't know if you remember, but I was having issues with the clumping where I wasn't getting it into solution because it was packing underneath the mixer.
Yes.
So I did end up, the timing worked out nicely. Avast started selling the Mississippi in smaller packages because I was not about to buy a 55-pound bag of Mississippi lime to try to subdivide it myself. I mean, even though, the $70 in shipping for the $30 bag was still cheaper than the equivalent anywhere else.
I know, that's funny.
The little buckets you can get now are great.
More than double the price of the value of the product you buy for shipping, and it's still magnitudes cheaper than buying anything else out there from other known sources. It's just crazy. I ended up splitting up.
Wild.
I ended up splitting a bag with a local reefer to kind of help that off. And I thought, I'll never use this much, and I'm already chewing through it pretty good. And then he quit reefing. I think he's in here now. But so then I inherited his other bucket, anyways. I'm covered for a while.
So I did just pull it up. It's $46 from Concentrates Northwest for a 50 pounds. So we're at less than $1 a pound. Now let's see that shipping, just for curiosity's sake. $83.
And keep in mind, a half a pound, a pound is like a half a kilogram, right? And saturated kalkwasser is 1.73 grams per liter, right? So you're talking 6 grams of sodium hydroxide in a gallon of water. That's going to take you a long ways.
Oh, for sure. I'm sure that 50 pounds would go a very long way. And so that's at least, the nice part of being able to buy the smaller quantities. I think I ordered the gallon. I think next time I'm going to buy the 5-gallon bucket just to buy in bulk. But we're talking, it is much more expensive. The 1 gallon, which is 4.5 pounds, is $35. But that's still cheaper than 4.5 pounds from BRS.
Oh, yeah. And it's, honest to God, I found that.
And it's the good stuff.
I find that I'm getting more consistent results dosing the way I'm dosing using the Mississippi lime than I ever had with the BRS. And you can even hold it in your hand.
In your case,
and it's
the solubility is more important than anything. In my case, as long as I'm hitting saturated, it's fine. But in your
Well, not
case, you're trying
solubility.
to super saturate it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, solubility is same. I'm just running a suspension, right? Literally, it's just hanging in the wind. And
Oh
from
yeah,
that
just
aspect,
yep.
it hangs there better because it's a finer grade, and it's not. Some other people were talking about they're always worried about calcification or degradation of equipment. So I've got a picture I thought I'd show that. So you can see some minor abiotic precipitation on the union there. That's 22. I have not hauled this pump out since I started slurry. So that's 22 months sitting in slurry as far as, dosing my tank goes. I haven't cleaned my pumps that long. I do this weird thing where since I was mad at myself for buying Core 20 pumps to begin with, I'm just seeing like, well, how long can it go before it breaks? See how I can neglect it. And then that might just be an excuse to either clean it or replace it, but whatever. I'm going to see how long it can go until it actually stops working from neglect. And so far, 2 years in slurry is not good enough to take it out. But yeah, you can see that.
Have you had any power supply issues with it?
I've lost one power supply in the almost 3 years. And then
That's not terrible.
and then some people talk about, oh, you'll kill your tank over time, maybe not in a week, but 2 years on slurry. Nothing's dying here, and the only copper rain you can see is that slight dusting in the bottom of my sand bed there, or somebody call that dinos. But, okay.
It looks great.
So you have you had any equipment issues with your calc washer, with the stir and whatnot?
The only issue I've found was I had a technical issue with the Vectra early on. I think I had the date and the time not set properly, so it was hitting its daily max limits at the wrong times. But that was a clearly operator error, I'm going to go with. And the issue with the Kohler Labs Kalkwasser not kind of going into solution and clumping too much. Otherwise, the Vectra has been running nonstop for, I bought that at Reefapalooza 2022, so it's been running for over a year now, close to 18 months, no maintenance. I probably should check. I know people have to replace the tube in it.
Yeah, but, you haven't had tube issues? That's the one thing I've complained about with the Vectras is that I've gone through, and this is to say I've used Vectras for things dosing other than Kalkwasser, so like trace elements or other stuff, right? I think it was carbon dosing for a while, and I would lose tube assemblies just from that. So I know it's not Kalkwasser. My last tube assembly, but I wonder if they worked that issue out. Okay. Yeah. And that's the nice thing I liked about, that's what I did too with, well, I did it two ways. When I first put it in place, I was dosing calc out of my ATO, and that's when I turned my sand bed into a parking lot. And then I went to that, but I went to that calc, that calc stir that you have. And yeah, just squirting RODI water through it, flawless. Never had a problem with that. But so far, knock on wood, maybe Vectras fixed that issue with the tube assemblies. Because I've been on this last one now for 6 or 7 months, and it hasn't broke. So like maybe they fixed it. It definitely looks different a little bit.
But it didn't break. I know it didn't break because I'd get a leak alert, but it's been running strong 18 months, no maintenance.
That's good. Yeah. All right. So maybe they have fixed that issue, and I got the Vectras early on, and I had a slew of I think I bought 5 or 6 spare tube assemblies at the time, and I was chewing through those like crazy. And I think since I re-upped on those, they look different, like they've changed something. So that could be a non-issue anymore. But yeah, either way,
it's a good sign.
So we're talking Kalkwasser here. Other people call it slake lime, pickling lime. 2 brands that we've mentioned are Mississippi and BRS Pharma. I used back in the day in the early 2000s. I actually used Mrs. Lime, or that pickling lime stuff that you buy in the store. That's
from the grocery store.
Yeah, the grocery store. So, the sourcing just wasn't there at the time. But some people are still using that today. I've heard on some forums, and that's fine, because if you're using like a small nano tank, like 32 gallon, you're not going to go through a lot of it, right? It's just you're unlikely to do that, but you'll have to scale up to whatever source you want. Have you ever tried any of the ones with supplements in it, like enhancements, like magnesium mixed in, or played around?
I have not. I've been doing the moonshiners method since I was in the 120.
Mhm.
So I've just avoided any of the other additives to avoid conflicting with everything else I've been dosing.
Okay. So yeah, some of the benefits of calc, what we like are, flexible applications. You can throw it in your ATO, you can do a calc stir, you can put it in a bucket, you can do slurry. It just depends on what your goals are. So you might have space problem. For me, I've got an evaporation problem. So it's super versatile, and you could even do something as simple as set up a gravity feed bucket, right, with a roller IV line and just drip it in nightly. So I mean, you can go super
BRS
low
actually
tech.
used to sell a kit. It was a kalkwasser drip kit for you to
Yeah,
take whatever container you wanted and gravity drip kalkwasser.
yeah, that's the way I started on it. In
So many
fact,
options.
I I only started using two part, like sodium carbonate and calcium chloride, 6 months ago on my little nano tank or my little frag tank.
Mhm.
Otherwise, I had no experience with it. It's like, okay, how do you do this stuff? But it's kind of funny. So one other thing for if you're not using Kalkwasser today or you're not too familiar with it, there's a formula that I go by, and it's from Randy Holmes Farley. Some of you might be familiar with his work. He's definitely got a presence on the Reef to Reef forums. So, and of course, he's been writing articles for Reefkeeping magazine since I think the dawn of time, since I was first in the hobby way back when. But I've developed a calculator for Excel that you can calculate anything from normal saturated to 4% by weight. It's all built off of this one premise where if you take 1.25% of your overall system volume and you dose that as incomplete, as a normal saturated calc, you'll dump 1.4 DKH worth of carbonate alkalinity in your tank and 10 parts per million of calcium. So if you take that math and extrapolate that to your system volume, scale it to how many DKH your tank is consuming every day, you get a number of gallons of water that you want to dose every day. So you can see as I threw my tank example in there, and I'm actually dosing more than I think I think my tank consumption is at 1.4 DKH. But just as an example, in a 200 gallon system, I'm at 1.75 gallons a day. Well, even in the winter, maybe 1.5 is all I'm seeing out of my tank. And in the summer, less than a gallon at some days, because it's pretty buttoned up. So that's why I'm doing slurry, is because I can't keep up with that. And then I'm too nervous to trust my apex. Kyle, he's been rocking that method where he's dosing pH, and that's working awesome. And then you don't have to worry about. And you said you're not running into limitations for evaporation replacement?
No, so I set myself up with a limitation based on evaporation initially, and my demand has definitely exceeded that, which is why I had to put the calcium reactor back online. I did think about moving to slurry, but I already had the calcium reactor, so it's not like the upfront cost was already gone because I'd already spent it. So the calcium reactor was still sitting there ready to go. I figured, let's see, as at a low flow rate, if I can balance and not kill my pH with it, I'll use what I have instead of kind of going back to the drawing board here.
Yeah. Yep. But it's a versatile solution, and there's just a couple things to remember about it. The things that I'm talking about, trying to remember here, I got to skip forward a little bit. Apologize. Is safety considerations.
Yeah, don't
Make
stick
sure
your bare hand in a bucket of it.
Yes, it's high pH, so don't stick your bare hands in there. You want to avoid skin, especially with the super concentrated stuff. I did immediately go back to the sink and wash my hands off really well. But a momentary exposure is fine. But seriously, I can't advocate doing that. So don't do what I do. Do what I say. Right. High pH considerations. So if you're going to splash it, don't get in your eyes. That's obviously bad. It's like really bad. Try not to breathe it in. It's very dusty, especially the better it is, the dustier it is, from what we've seen. course, evaporation limitations. There's some debate on equipment wear, depending on your experiences. I know some people are talking about equipment wear, but I tend to think that those are experiences where it's more probably educational and implementation problem than anything. I've talked to too many people that have been successful with it otherwise. And then, of course, just watch where you're getting your sources from. Stick with known brands if possible, because you don't want impurities. People talk about in the past copper rain. It's just kind of a euphemism for make sure that there's not a lot of junk in the stuff that you're buying. So I tend to avoid, even though it's probably great for human consumption out of the grocery store, we can absorb and deal with a lot of things that our reef tanks can't, right?
Yeah, that is true. We are not coral, biologically speaking. Just because it is safe for human consumption doesn't mean it's safe for invertebrates, like your copper example.
Okay. Yeah. Jim just mentioned, there's a bunch of really nice people, and it's about the most chill environment you'll ever get to. You can ask the stupidest questions ever, and I promise nobody will make you feel sorry for it. There's just not that vibe there. It's free. So we're not selling you anything. There's no limits. You don't have to buy a membership. Everybody has equal rights, and it's just a chill environment. And there's a lot of super smart people like Kyle here, who's teaching me a ton of things about, just how to reef and electrical. And we'll get into that because he's got pretty cool implementation of his power. That's
trying to see how to share the server.
Both he and Telegram have inspired me to get my shit together with backup power.
Backup power. I'm assuming we're getting to that next. There we
go.
Next,
we hit it. Backup power. So if anybody has more questions, this wasn't meant to be like a how-to implementation of this is how you put kalkwasser in it. We wanted to talk about, concepts and why you should use it and when you shouldn't use it and why do people do one thing and not another. Just if you got specific questions, reach out to Kyle. He's super successful. You can see the size of his colonies that he's grown up with his method of kalkwasser. I've got a different method. His is more primary SPS than LPS. Mine is more LPS driven. So it's pretty interesting. There's a lot of ways that you can use kalkwasser. Doesn't matter what your setup is. You can accommodate different methods for it. All right, talk to me a little bit about your journey on e-power and backup solutions.
Yeah, so this wasn't...
And why did you put one in?
So I learned we won't call it a hard lesson, but 2020 actually, we had an extended power outage and I spent 5 days running my tank on a generator. And that was nerve-wracking to all hell.
Did you have a generator when it went down?
I had a generator. I was prepared, except for I was at work when the power first went out. And it was the game of making phone calls of who can go pull my generator out, start it, so easy part, and then figure out which things from the fish tank need to get plugged into the generator.
Is that your cat?
So when we moved into the house, yes, we have a foster that is not happy with sitting in here.
He wants to be on camera.
Oh my God. Lavender. She just got spayed, so she can't be out and about. Let me see if Kayla can relocate.
I was just gonna ask you. I'm like, it sounds horny.
She wasn't in here before. Kayla literally just brought her back because she lost her cone.
That's hilarious. I have 2 cats at house. So.
Oh my God. Wow.
It's reaping with cats. It's all good.
I'm hoping if we ignore her, she'll just stop.
Yeah, just go on. Sorry to interrupt you. It was just funny.
On. So I lost my hold on. Yeah. So that gap of getting the generator running was always, of course, the biggest concern.
Sorry.
So, good. She's taking the cat. I wanted to buy some time. I know you can do those like Tesla power walls And there are battery systems that could keep your whole house and everything powered for days, but of course they're prohibitively expensive. So this was Telegram inspired, and I took a solar charge controller, an MPPT, and initially I didn't even have any solar hooked up to it. And all this is doing is it's taking AC from the wall, converting it to DC to charge the battery, but also passing AC through to that sub panel on the right. And this way it powers the tank, it keeps a big battery charged, and in the event of a power failure, it switches to what's called inverter mode, where it takes the DC, converts it to AC to feed that circuit. So that's the basic background of it.
And that does, and in your case, it's an auto transfer, right? It's you don't do it or manually.
Correct. I don't have to do anything. It will just happen. And based on my calculations, and we'll get into some of the other programming with the Apex to make it last, depending on ambient temperature, I can get 4 to 6 hours out of my pair of batteries. So that means I have 4 to 6 hours to get home, get the generator set up, address an issue if I forgot to test run the generator recently and clean the carburetor. You know, I wanted to give myself some wiggle room. That was the main point of this. Eventually, I'd like to think I can get enough solar to offset some of the electricity cost and enough batteries to buy myself more time. But right now, my goal was something practical. Get this running and give me wiggle room.
Yeah, because we can always scale up batteries, right? You can always add batteries in parallel, right? So series, you add the voltages, and parallel, you add the power, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, you can just keep stacking.
Yeah. So this is a pair of 100 amp hour 12 volt batteries because this inverter uses 24 volt. So because they're in series to make 24 volt, it's still 100 amp hours.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So you have a 24 volt system. I actually didn't know that. I just assumed it was a 12 volt system and that you were running those batteries in parallel. Okay. And you had 200 amp.
That was purely the specifications of the inverter. I don't remember if this manufacturer had a 12 volt model, but I think at 24 volts, the inverter might be a little more efficient than at 12 volts.
That's why I went 24 as well. Because when I was looking, I was on the fence for so long as to which way I wanted to go. You know, do I want to go with a solar charge controller like you did, or do I want to do something else? And then do I want to do 12 volt, 24, 36 or 48 even, right? 48 starts to scare me because if you can juice yourself pretty good with 48 volts.
Yeah, then you're approaching where safety. I mean, not that safety goes out the window with this, but at 48 volts, nominal, meaning really closer to 54, you can give yourself a good little zap there.
And 48 volts of DC power is a whole world different, right, than 48 volts of AC, right? So I think I'd laugh at that comparably, but yeah, wouldn't even kid around with that. Okay, that's pretty interesting.
So I go with no tickles here.
Yeah, and you said sub panel. So talk a little bit about the sub panel and how does all your equipment from your Reef go into that? So is that sub panel just feeding like a regular outlet upstairs, and then you're plugging?
So what I did was I'll go through, I guess, my installation process was I installed a new 40 amp breaker and some 8 gauge wire to feed the inverter, because that's what the manufacturer calls for, because that's how much it could support up to. I then ran the number 8 on the outlet to that gray sub panel you see on the right. And what that does is that allows me to add any circuits I want and properly protect them. Because if I were to just connect them to the inverter output could supply up to 40 amps if demanded. However, your normal house wiring can't tolerate that. So if you just go back a picture, Rob.
Sure.
And so in my case, my tank, I had installed a 20 amp circuit to the tank, and eventually I'll add a second one just to spread the risk. But so I took the line after I got this set up out of the panel where it was getting fed from a 20 amp breaker, terminated it into that sub panel, and put the 20 amp breaker there. So now the inverter is powering that little panel, and it's protected by that 20 amp breaker feeding the entire tank circuit.
Okay, so this is good. This is good stuff for me because I've got all my equipment and all the componentry ready. And like I said, I'm just waiting to rearrange some cords and stuff. I haven't quite figured out what I want to do because I'm going to be putting a similar system to you where I'm going to be running a sub panel. So like we're both going to go the route, or you have already, I will as well, where we're still going to use all of our DC power supplies, right, and converters from our normal equipment. Or maybe even if they don't, and if you're using an AC, you still go to any outlets supplied by the sub panels, versus you could go the route where you could eliminate all those power bricks, and depending on whether or not you have a 12 volt or a 24 volt system, use like some buck converters. So let's say I had a 12 volt battery system, use some buck converters to go up to 24 if you needed to supply anything along those lines with those. There's multiple ways you can go about that.
In this case, you totally could create a DC power supply bus as well. In my case, this is in the basement near my panel and not near the tank. So I kind of just figured I'll accept the conversion losses and just have to scale my system up. So like with the sub panel, I got I think it's a 6-spot panel, so that this way I'd like to add my nano tank to it, break my main tank up into 2 circuits. So, in the event of an errant breaker trip, I don't lose everything. So, you can do some risk mitigation there. And so as I scale my batteries up, I'll start to add more things onto this to keep my, I don't want to say less expensive risks protected as well, but like the things that, my main SPS Reef obviously isn't going to tolerate a power outage the same way my Nano is full of soft corals.
So when you're considering your battery backup system, what considerations did you make, or how did you calculate, like how much batteries do I want to start out with? Are you powering everything off of your tank? Are you assuming that your lights are going to keep running off the battery system, or are you just doing like critical life supply stuff?
Good, but in my case, I bought the biggest pair of batteries I could afford at the time, figuring I want to buy as much time as possible. So what I also did was, and you've got the screenshots from my Apex, I created a virtual outlet because the Apex can do power monitoring of another outlet. So I have the Apex's external supply plugged into an outlet that isn't on that circuit. And so the Apex knows if the house loses power.
Okay, so you got it on what they call short power, right?
Yeah, because the energy bars aren't going to know the power's out because they're going to get fed off the battery. Once that outlet is triggered, the Apex will go through a series of programs to reduce the speed of my return pump to save power. Will turn off unnecessary loads like my T5s if they're on, because that's 400 watts right there for what? I don't need that in a power outage.
No, that's genius, dude. I had never considered
turn off my LEDs, turn off my gyres, rely on heaters and the circulating pump, and that'll be it. I just need to get, I might have the Kalkwasser on it actually still, because that's not really drawing much power, but I wanted to eliminate the bigger loads anyway, to buy as much time as possible.
I'm gonna have to take a page out of your book then, because see, I love talking like this because I'm learning so much already. This is awesome because the system I've got going in place, it has actually 2 feeds. It has one that's only active off of shore power, and then when shore power goes off, that line drops. I was thinking I would pump most of my useless things like lights to that, right? Because then I don't care. And then, like you said, the other things where I could throttle down some power on my power heads to conserve power usage like that. That's definitely where I'm going to take a look at some of the Apex program you've done to extend that life of your batteries. But you're right, you are budgeting time with money. In the case of batteries, is how much time can you afford, and basically just add up the watt hours, right, of each device that you're going to plan on using. And if it has a range, you're going to just estimate, whatever nominal range. Like if you run it at max, then assume, that it's going to run. If it says 50 watt hours, every hour you're going to suck 50 watts, right?
Yeah. So that's why, like with the MXM being introduced, that this was a good use case for it, because while the only device I'm controlling with it is that Vortec Versa. We've been mixing up Versa, Vectra, and Vortec. Their return pump from Ecotech, I can throttle it down with the MXM when I lose power to buy more time, because the reality of it is I just need to circulate enough water in an outage to maintain tank temperature. I don't really care about, the added turnover for filtration and flow for the corals. It is purely just keeping it alive.
So Telegram asked, explain shore power. And when it comes to explaining anything electrical related, I am not going to open my mouth. I'm going to let Carl supply the right
power
answers.
Was kind of your term, but what Rob's
it's just a term I've heard, right?
Yeah, it's your main power in this case. Your house is, we'll call it the shore. It comes from the marine world of when you get into port, you plug the ship into an outlet. It's a really big outlet, but you plug into an outlet at the port, so you don't need to run your own generators. So in this case, your shore power is your unprotected outlet, giving your apex power so that it knows if your main power goes out, your shore power goes out, the apex goes, it's gone. I need to do something. So that's the case I'm doing here. And before I forget, actually, I'll come back to it, but I wanted to touch on some safety things with this as well.
I think the RVers and the van lifers adopted that shore power terminology, and it just seems to everywhere you look for solar power, DIY power, everybody's using that term. So, all right, so moving along. Now this breaker here, that is a protection, right, for the charge controller.
It's actually, it kind of goes both ways. It's a 100 amp DC breaker, which is based on the size of the wiring and the rating of the charge controller, but it's actually to protect everything in the event of an overload. So that's something I don't think a lot of people think about, is either fusing or circuit breakers on the DC side as well, is, in the event of an issue with the charge controller, it overheats, it faults, and it creates a DC fault. That breaker will trip as well. So I've got AC circuit protection and DC circuit protection to prevent the risk of a fire or damage to the equipment.
I think I bought a 100 amp fuse for the positive lead between my battery and my charge controller. But I think I did.
That works too. I opted for a breaker for resetability, but as well as I can use it as a disconnect switch. So if I need to replace a battery, or when I expand, I don't have to do it with it connected to the charge controller. I can open the breaker, add my next set of batteries, maybe give the batteries a chance to equalize to each other, and then close that switch to reactivate the charge controller.
Right. I did buy a breaker switch, a disconnect switch for that system as well. So,
okay,
but I think that's a consideration, though. I like the breaker idea there too. So how did you calculate the size of that breaker? Like, what was your determination there?
Circuit breaker sizing is mostly wire size based. That's something that confuses a lot of people when you think about, like, a 15 amp household circuit or a 20 amp. It's not to protect your vacuum cleaner. It is purely to protect the wire in the wall. So in this case, the wire size was based on what the charge controller was rated for, which was up to 100 amps of charging. That's using, it's 60-40. It's solar plus AC.
Mm-hmm.
So it can do 100 amps of charging. So I went with the wire is, that might be number 6 or number 2. I don't remember off the top of my head. And a breaker sized for that wiring so that the wiring doesn't catch fire. If we approach an overload of the wire, the breaker will trip. Same thing with the sub panel feeding the tank.
That's one thing I get paranoid about getting wrong, is wire size, because if you go too small, that thing is just going to get hot, right? And then obviously you could have a failure in a power draw or anything like that. So if you're not sure about how to do that, a lot of these places that you would go to buy these things from, right? So if you went to I think I went to a place called NAS Solar or something like that, someplace online. Mm-hmm. They want to sell you stuff, so they'll spend time talking to you and walking you through that. For sure.
This is definitely one of those things where the education gets expensive.
Oh God, yes.
But it's safer that way too.
Yeah, and there's budgets for everybody. So like Kyle, looks like you bought these are pre-built batteries, right?
Yes, I decided I wasn't going to fiddle around making cells. I have a friend who does make lithium ion cells for himself, and just the way the technology is right now, I figured, you know what? I can buy the batteries built, over, done with, put them in, peace of mind. It's got the BMS built into it. I don't have to think about it. It's one of those things I could have DIY'd, but at that point, we're getting so far down into the minutia. I DIY'd the whole rest of the system. I'll use some pre-built batteries.
I know it's always, yeah, you can trade time, money, and maybe quality. I don't know, pick two, right? What is this thing going on here?
So that goes to we'll call it my final backup system, is the generator interlock. So the battery only buys me time to get my generator running. Obviously, the generator is the long-term answer here. This is the proper way to install a portable generator. Because obviously, if you've ever looked at buying a whole home generator, they're a fortune.
Yeah.
So this was the cheap alternative. I don't know, $1,000 portable generator and $500 for the electrician to do this, versus upwards of 12 grand.
Is this the sub panel that's fed from your charge controller, or is this your main panel for your house?
This is my main panel. So at the top, that breaker is the actual main service disconnect breaker from the utility company. That hunk of metal Z looking thing is to keep me from closing that generator breaker with the main also closed. So the electrician put in a receptacle on the side of the house that actually plugs the generator in. So I've got a 30 amp twist lock connection from the generator to the side of the house outside, with a nice 30-foot extension cord, so I can keep the generator away from the house. That feeds to the panel. So I would open the main disconnect on top, which will allow that bracket to slide so that I can close the generator breaker.
Okay. And then at that point in time, once that's all hooked up and running, you actually have shore power restored, for lack of a better term, to your entire house. That's nice.
We tested it over the summer. We did have an outage, and I was able to run 3 window units, the tank, and just about everything else without even thinking twice about it.
Very nice. So the system that I'm considering doing is where I'm not going to probably hook my generator into my main panel. I'm going to do a similar thing where I'm going to do an automatic transfer switch. It's like a secondary automatic transfer switch where it'll flip over to a sub, where I can plug my generator into the sub panel and just run that. And I think I'm also wiring my furnace for the house, because I live in Wisconsin. So if it's in the wintertime and it's cheaper to keep my house heated than try to not heat my house in a long-term power loss and then try to heat my tank off of batteries. That doesn't make any sense. So we're doing
I can put my boiler on the generator power as well. Luckily, we've got gas, so I don't have electric heat. I just need the electric for the circulating pump.
Yeah. And those are cheaper. The same thing like with a furnace. If you wanted to run your furnace off a generator, you're really just providing power for the blower, which is not as much as you think. So walk us through, this is a shot of, hopefully everybody can make this out. This is a shot of your Apex.
Yep, so that's the Apex programming we were talking about. And so what we've got here is that one on the left, our first one will go left to right. That's the virtual outlet that is looking at the Apex's external power supply plugged into shore power. So when that sees shore power goes away, it's turning that virtual outlet on.
I'm about to put my glasses on. You guys have to tell me if I'm still rocking this pirate outfit with my glasses.
You need an eye patch.
Okay. Yeah, there we go.
So that's the Oh, was it the left one? They might actually in a different order. Sorry, I'm talking about the center one. I didn't make it bigger. I just assumed which one was which. Sorry, the center one is that virtual outlet that I was just talking about. If power Apex off, then on. So, and that 001 there is just so that a little blip doesn't trigger anything. We want an actual outage. So I gave it a 1 minute delay in there. So that turns that virtual outlet on. Now the other two, the one on the left and the right, are two different things I'm doing that are looking for that virtual outlet. So the one on the left is my return pump, where if that virtual outlet that I call power loss is on, it slows my return pump down.
Okay, not like 25% or something like that, right?
Moves it down to 25%. Then the one on the right is actually, those are my T5s. Those I'm just turning straight off.
Right. Yeah.
And
because
there's a bunch of other programming things in there, but the highlight was those are getting turned off. My pumps are getting slowed down.
Right. So yeah, in the case of the whole point of battery backup, like we still, I think, in my personal opinion, is that you should have like 2 stages of backup, right? So you got a long term where we're way beyond what anybody can normally afford for batteries, right? And batteries are for when I'm not at home. How can I keep my critical systems running, right? So, because if you are home, you can just go out and plug in your generator and everything was great. But if you're at work or on vacation or anything like that, you need time to get home and correct the situation or get your tank sitter going in there. But definitely having a generator and a battery backup plan, like long-term and short-term, is crucial. I'm impressed with this Apex configuration here and taking into consideration, because in the time between you can lose power and get a generator in place, you don't need lights, right? Or you don't need some things, arguably maybe not even a heater, right? Depending on your individual setup and time of year, climate. Those things are all things that you think about for sure. But I like how this is set up.
Thank you.
So if you have any questions, go ahead.
Sorry, no, I was just gonna say, you got a lot of different things you can do, and it's just a matter about buying time, because I mean, normal circumstances, of course, the power is coming back. You don't need an entire power plant in your house. You just need to get by. Your reef will be okay a couple days without lights. People do 3-day blackouts for dynos all the time. So if I got to do a 1-day blackout, it is what it is. As long as it keeps my fish alive and my corals alive, they don't have to be thriving. It's okay if my growth is stunted. As long as nothing dies, I'm happy.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. You don't have to keep your pedal on the metal. At that point, it's survival mode. And it starts to make sense at a certain point to have a battery backup system. Like when you have a system like I think Kyle has, and you've got 3, 4, 5 years invested into the livestock into that tank. I've got 2 to 3 in mine. Losing that is a travesty. And you're not just losing lost animal life, you losing 2 years of your time or more, So at some point, maybe at the beginning, it doesn't make sense to have a battery backup and you can do what you got to do. But at some point, it's spending more money, but it's a solid insurance plan. Because when you raise
you're protecting your investment and your heartache.
Yeah, and your heartache. Yeah, and honest to God, some of those fish I've had, from that big and now they're that big. You kind of get attached to them a little bit, and like the last thing you want to see is have them go. So what we got here is Kyle purchased his batteries completed, and no additional labor or consideration other than just making that purchase and sized according to your budget. I'm still on a journey where I'm trying to learn more about DC circuitry, electronics, and batteries and things like that. So I decided to take my shot at AliExpress and go the DIY battery route. I've watched a lot of Will Prowse videos, DIY solar, and that guy's great. He's very easy to watch. He's very entertaining, but he's very knowledgeable and easy to listen to. So it's easy to absorb his stuff. That's where I got a lot of knowledge on here. And of course, I've asked questions to Kyle. I've reached out to guys like Telegram. They've all been super supportive and helpful in answering my questions. So this is a 24 volt setup as well. It is 280 amps at 24 volts. So there's like 6.4 kilowatt hours in there. So there's a lot of power there. I think we talked, was that last week or the week before? The yin and the yang of buying versus building, right?
Yep.
At a certain price point, where does it make sense? And because you can get brand new grade A cells off of AliExpress for sure, but you got to be careful what you're buying. And if it sounds too good to be true, then you're probably getting grade B, which are grade B are used cells. And I think each one of these, I was like between $110 and $130 each. So I think it came out to, and there's definitely grade Bs in here, right? Because I didn't get the full 280. I think at the end of the day, I was getting 260 amp hours out of these. So I think that came out to like 16 cents. And then I think we did some math where, what was your kilowatt hour pennies that you spent? Weren't you like at 25 cents? Something like that?
Yeah, I think it was something like that. And yours was probably near like half of that.
Yeah, but and if I bought grade A's, yeah, it was a good, interesting discussion, right? Because I mean, in the course of making this thing, I blew up one of these things. I mean, it didn't quite explode, but it got about twice as large as when it was newer. Yeah, well, it was, that's the thing, when you're learning this stuff, you'll make mistakes, and Rob learned how not to use a battery or a benchtop power supply, and learned how constant voltage and constant current work, and how to set those up on your benchtop. Well, I didn't quite set that up right and overcharged the battery. So I think I ran what should be a 3.2 volt cell nominally. I think there was like 6 volts, 5 volts in there. So, and it basically swelled up to pretty bad. So I torched that thing. So I had to actually go out and buy a new one. But that was a lesson learned. So I mean, it's part of that game.
That was part of why I bought the pre-builts. Was at the time, when we were approaching winter when I built that system, we're likely to have an outage. My goal was get something functional. I can learn how to build my own batteries later.
Right.
And in your case, you dove head first.
I did. Some of these things, like I said, I've been on a quest to learn more of this stuff. So I was okay to do that. And like I said, it was inspiring to watch those videos. So if I had to do it again, would I buy some? Yeah, maybe not. After I've been through this now, obviously I could do this with my eyes closed. And you can definitely save some money, but it's a learning curve. And if you want to add up the total cost, I had to buy a benchtop power supply. I had to have an inverter that wasn't my charge controller, because I had to do, discharge tests, right? And learn how to balance. And so there was some initial upfront costs that obviously I'll extend to use through my hobby anyways, because I'm always tinkering and building stuff anyhow. But it's all things that you have to consider.
Yeah, it wasn't simply cost of material.
No, right. Yeah. So, but all the furtherment of the hobby, right?
Yep.
So if I wanted to double that, if I basically put another one of these side by side, it would be kind of like a Tesla Powerwall, right? So like 12 kilowatt.
Yeah.
So then let me see back up here. Okay, so Kyle mentioned a battery management system. So if you buy those pre-configured batteries, and if you actually peel them apart, you'd find something that looks similar to this. And a battery management system is basically just an insurance policy that protects the batteries from getting overcharged. Lithium iron phosphate, unlike lead acid batteries, can't be charged in the cold. So they need thermal protection. And even though in this case, we're inside the house, I guess it's plausible that if your house plummeted to less than 30 degrees Fahrenheit, that, you wouldn't want to charge these batteries, but, unlikely. But however that the case may be, it protects it from a lot of things. It helps balance the batteries out. But you have one of these buried in there. And this is just a 100 amp one that I got from Overkill Solar. So if you're building your own DIY, you'll learn about battery management systems. Smart shunt. So this one here is something I can access from Bluetooth, and then ultimately, I think I got the Vitron system. I got the Cerebro, so I'll be able to actually access that and see power usage from anywhere in the world. But here, this a shunt
really cool.
just basically. A shunt basically just tells you how much power has gone across, right? The negative leg. Did I get that right? That's the negative, the black. I think that's on the negative side. And then, so Kyle has a solar charge controller. I just went with a straight charger or inverter charger. So there's basically a automatic transfer switch in there and an inverter and just some other fancy stuff to help monitor that. And then 2 legs, transmit a shore power and then a failover battery backup.
Yeah, I opted for the solar one just because I've got a porch roof that's got some good sunlight. I figured if I can throw a couple panels up there, and if the power goes out on a sunny day, I buy myself a little extra time.
Yeah, I'm not
if
sure.
I lose it in a snowstorm, I'm SOL anyway.
Yeah, northern climates kind of suck, but I mean, plenty of people make solar power work up north this way. But I'm not sure if I'll ever do solar or not. But either way, Victron makes MPPT modules, so I could put one on there and expand this system to deal with solar. But I don't see that happening, so I was okay. This is just a fancy bus bar terminal to integrate all the shunts and everything else that I'm doing, and between the battery and the inverter charger. This is the unit that'll allow me to have Wi-Fi connectivity anywhere. And then of course, this is the automatic transfer switch that will allow me to switch over to my generator.
I like it.
So it's different approaches, but there's budget, there's time, there's experience, all things to consider. How much power can you afford? How much time do you need? And then, what are you trying to accomplish as far as keeping on in your tank, right? Power heads, return pumps for sure. Do you want to do batteries or do you want to do your heaters? Can you afford to? It just depends on the size of your system. I don't know.
Absolutely.
What do you think as far as if you had to do it all over again? Anything you would do differently?
There is one thing that I dislike a little bit about the charge controller I got was it's not a double conversion. So the battery is completely out of the equation normally, as opposed to a floating DC bus between a converter and an inverter. And I would have liked that because that also provides power filtering like a small computer UPS does.
Okay.
But I'm sure that charge controller would have cost me a fortune.
Yeah. Do you mind saying how much was that charge controller, that solar charge controller?
I want to say it was $500 or $600. The batteries were like $300 a piece. So between the 2 batteries, the solar charger, sub panel, and some wiring, probably all in at about $1,500.
Okay. Yeah, I think the Multi Plus I got for $1,200, and Victron it's a Cadillac. I was up in the air between.
You did buy top of the line. I bought what I could get on Amazon for sure.
No, and there's nothing wrong with that because your system is bulletproof. It's gonna work, and there's nothing wrong with it. I was just like I say, I don't know. Maybe I fell in love with the Victron stuff watching too many Prowse videos, but
there's some trade-off. In that case, it's paid for the Cadillac, but the Cadillac, I mean, looking at all your components, it's almost comical because you DIY'd these batteries.
It allowed me to spend more money.
Components.
Yeah. So that's the thing is that I saved a whole lot of money on the batteries, which allowed me to spend because I had an overall budget, And because I can be gone for a couple of days, I needed a lot of power. So that was.
Yeah, you needed a lot of time.
Time. Thank you. I needed a lot of time. So does anybody else have?
Buy time.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. So, anybody have any other questions for Kyle? I know we covered a lot. Like I say, I am not the foremost expert on battery backups. I've got the good fortune of being connected to a lot of people who do, like Kyle. Jim Telegram reached out. He's known for his knowledge and experience with e-power and backup systems. So learning a lot fast, and it's certainly fun. And like I say, if you have a big investment in your tank, you definitely don't want to make sure that you have a plan so you don't lose all that time and valuable life. And based off of that, you can tell that there are many roads to the airport with regards to carbon and alkalinity. We just covered kalkwasser today. we didn't even get into two-part and other forms like calcium reactors and things like that. But there's a lot of ways that you can go about it. And there's a lot of people on our Discord channel that do everything in between. And they're knowledgeable and happy to share that and help you be just as successful. So
there's more than one way to reef.
Yeah, right. That'd be CBB for copper band butterfly for me, Kayla. Is my favorite fish.
Copper band butterfly?
Yeah, she says, what's your favorite fish?
So my favorite fish is probably an Achilles tang, which we don't have. And I really wanted one, but we have that powder brown, and it's too aggressive, and they'd be too similar. It's not worth introducing.
I don't know much about those. Like the one fish that I am scared to have that I really want is a Moorish idol. I just think that my tank is cultivated to be more of a smorgasbord or a buffet for a fish like that, than any difficulty with feeding regimens. So,
mine was, there was no rhyme or reason for some of these fish. That was just like, a lot of these are all my original fish from when I first got into the hobby in 2018. So there was just like, I like this fish. Oh, it eats algae. Great. So that's how we ended up with the yellow eye coal tang, the fox face, the powder brown. I still have some damsels that have been hanging on. The one damsel and 2 chromies left. And then the black clownfish we raised from itty bitty babies. One of them used to take rides down the overflow.
I had some bangy cardinals that had that bred, and actually some of those fish got sucked down the overflow and actually grew out in my sump. I don't know how, because I don't know what they were eating down there. Yeah, it must have been copepods. I don't know, but they weren't dead, and I found them far larger than they are when they were born. So that was a mystery as to
where these magical fish come from.
I don't know. I was like, I've got spare fish. Like, where did these come from? But yeah, it's crazy what that happens. Well, this has been a lot of.
Had any clownfish fry make it yet? They've been laying eggs in the zoanthids, and nothing. I haven't seen anything hatch. I suspect the eel has eaten most of the eggs. So free fish food.
I'm waiting for my clowns to start. They're paired. I'm waiting for them to start laying. The male is young, so I'm not sure how old the males have to be when they can start becoming a mating age, however that is. I'm still on the fence on whether I want to try to hatch anything or not. I'm certainly set up for it with the phytoplankton. Growing rotophytes would be pretty easy. I've got plenty of space for tanks and stuff, so just to decide if do I want the time suck or not, because there's no money in rearing clownfish for sure. I think it would just be more of a learning exercise. Or if I did successfully rear clownfish, everybody's getting free clownfish. I'm not going to waste my time trying to sell them.
Yeah, that's part of why I was like, all right, so if I get if I help them and they live, now what do I do with them?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've been pretty good about resisting multi-tank syndrome, and I don't count, a small frag tank, because that's just, I call that, everybody's got a shit tank that you throw whatever into for whatever reason, by time or accidental frags or problem stuff. But well, Kyle, this has been awesome. Time has flown.
Yeah, no, this was great.
This has been a very educational stream for me. I hope some of you out there learn something, or at least are interested or inspired to learn more. Recommend definitely digging into backup power when it is time for you, and start thinking about those things ahead of time as your tank is growing out. If you have any questions, we've got a ton of resources and people who want to help other people be successful. I've been using Kalkwasser for a lot of years, and I've yet to kill anything with it. A lot of people say, hey, Kalkwasser is dangerous, but I don't know, in your experience, Kyle, overdosing anything is bad. So you can nuke your tank with 2-part. You can nuke your tank with anything. So just have redundancy, like Kyle mentioned. He's got many different ways to have a plan. Right, exactly. And it doesn't have to be an expensive plan. So Thanks for hanging out with us on this Saturday night. I don't know, what have you been rocking?
Thanks for having me, Rob.
I have Sprecher Maple Root Beer.
Maple root beer. I just assumed you were drinking an adult beverage this whole time.
No. I mean, well, I didn't know how long the stream would go, and then I probably thinking, well, if I was rocking some beers, I'll probably sound like an idiot more than I normally do. So I think I'd stick with the Sprecher Root Beer.
I poured myself one whiskey at the beginning, and that was it.
Nice. What kind?
That was 1776 rye. I've taken a liking to ryes lately.
Ooh, a rye. I like a good rye. Yeah, I won't say no to a rye.
There's a lot going on. People underestimate ryes, but that's a different conversation.
It's my favorite bread, so why not whiskey, right?
Yes. And rye whiskey and rye bread. I'm all for it.
Yeah, exactly the same thing, right? No. All right, man.
Both together.
Been great talking, and we'll keep in touch because I definitely have some things to ask you about the sub panel when I get to that point, which I imagine will be within the next month or so. I will probably be starting to hang that stuff up. So,
yep,
all right, everybody.
You know how to get a hold of me, and anyone can always message me on Instagram if you got questions.
Yeah, and check out Kyle's YouTube channel. He's got some cool stuff going on there. it's kind of laid back like this one. Probably not seeing him put out stuff every week. Neither I do because we have lives and other things to do. But
yes,
it's when he does put some out, it's definitely worth watching. And thanks everybody for hanging out. And we'll catch you soon.
Thanks, Rob.
Take care.